So from the Pokemon trailers, we've already seen Tyranitar Terastallize into a Ghost-type Pokemon, and I'm going to quickly go over why this is a great idea and why I think Ghost is the best option for Tyranitar. So if you look at Tyranitar as it normally stands, being Dark and Rock, there is a few glaring weaknesses that can be noticed, especially on the defensive side of the field. So, for example, it takes 4 times damage from fighting, which means it has a double weakness, but then it also takes 2 times damage from ground, bug, steel, water, grass, and fairy. This means out of the 18 possible types, it has 7 weaknesses. Now, defensively, this isn't too great. Now, it does have some resistances, so it takes half damage from normal, flying, poison, ghost, fire, and dark, and it takes 0 damage from psychic. But the fact that it has these big glaring weaknesses is one of the problems that Tyranitar faces when it comes out into competitive. However, if we swap it to just a ghost type Pokemon, it takes 2 times damage from ghost and dark, and then it resists poison and bug, but takes no damage from normal and fighting. Now, for Tyranitar, fighting Pokemon are the kind of the bane of its existence, so having the ability to swap at a moment's notice and kind of negate that huge threat is always going to be amazing. Now, when it comes to Ghost Pokemon, a new weakness now for Tyranitar, you're not really going to see people kind of bring a Ghost Pokemon against Tyranitar before it Terastallizes, because Ghost is weak to Tyranitar's Dark moves. So it kind of keeps those in check. Also, it's very rare for a Dark type to come in and fight another Dark type. Again, it's not something you normally see. So even though it does have weaknesses in this Ghost form, its previous typings already kind of negate those weaknesses, meaning it's kind of a cost neutral. Now, you could play some head games with this, like someone brings in their Ghost Pokemon because they think you're going to Terastallize and things like that. But the main thing here is offensively, it still has its stab from rock, its stab from dark, and is now adding a stab from ghost. Adding this stab from ghost effectively means that Tyranitar isn't resisted by anything. So not only does Ghost shore up its defenses and gives it weaknesses to things that generally don't want to fight it in the first place, it offensively is giving it the ability to hit everything. Now, switching to a Ghost type may cause some issues when it comes to Sandstorm, because it would now take periodic damage once it Terastallizes, unless they make it so Sandstorm only reacts to your original typing. That's something we'll have to see. But beyond that, it's going to be amazing and competitive with this. And in terms of actually receiving a Ghost move, it will get Terra Blast, which will be based on either its attack or special attack, whichever is highest. So if you do decide to maybe run a special attacking Tyranitar, you still have a move that works with Ghost. And also if you do just a normal attacking Tyranitar, you have that move as well. So yeah, Tyranitar is going to be probably one of the most used Pokemon we'll see, at least in the early stages. And I'm really excited to see it. Speaking of ghosts, next up we have Chandelure, the fire and ghost type Pokemon. Now, traditionally, fire and ghost Pokemon are weak to ground, rock, ghost, water, and dark, and they're also able to resist poison, steel, fire, grass, ice, fairy, take quarter damage from bug, and they take no damage from normal and fighting. Now, if you were to Terastallize Chandelure into a grass type Pokemon, there is a few interesting type advantages that can occur. So when it is now mono grass, it would be weak to flying, poison, bug, fire, and ice. However, the fact that it has access to flash fire means that it's no longer weak to fire, so that's not really an issue. Now, its weakness to ice, you can kind of negate that with your ability to use fire attacks, and even before you Terastallize, you resist it in the fire form. Now, on top of that, it also is able to resist ground and water, which are effectively typings that are super effective against it before it Terastallizes, and it can also resist grass and electric. So effectively, it has less things that are going to hurt it, and it is able to resist the things that would originally hurt it in its original state. Now, offensively, things get even better. So without Grass Stab, it's already super effective against Bug, Ghost, Steel, Grass, Psychic, and Ice. And like we already said, Bug and Ice are super effective against Grass, but in and itself is super effective against them. Add on the Grass typing, and you are now super effective to Ground, Rock, and Water. 3 of the things that are super effective against Chandelure in its normal form. Also, Chandelure does get access to Energy Ball, so this would be Energy Ball plus Stab. So it'll be doing a lot of damage to the Rock, Ground, and Water Pokemon that normally come out to face a Chandelure, but it'll also have access to Terra Blast. And then with Flash Fire, the fact that it can take a hit from fire moves and be boosted up, people might see the Grass typing and think they have the advantage and completely forget about Flash Fire. So it has like a little bit of weird interactions with that. But overall, switching Chandelure to a pure grass type Pokemon is actually super beneficial for it. Also, I think it's going to be hilarious to put flowers on top of candles. But then again, it could also be hilarious to put candles on top of candles. So Chandelure definitely has a lot of possibilities when it comes to funny hacks. So a Pokemon that should be no stranger to those who have done competitive, Nuzlocke, or just played Pokemon in general is Gyarados. So Gyarados is a water flying type, which means that it takes 4 times damage from electric, it takes 2 times damage from rock, and then it takes half damage from fighting, bug, steel, fire, and water, and takes no damage from ground. So in terms of defensive typing, it's actually pretty good where it's sitting. So if we do just change it to a mono ground type, a few things happen. Now, when it's in a ground form, it'll be weak to water, grass, and ice, but it does resist poison and rock. So rock was the only thing that was super effective against it. And then it takes 0 damage from electric, which is the thing that was 4 times super effective against it. So effectively, it negates pretty much all of its weaknesses from its water flying form. So things that normally come in to defeat it when you normally see a Gyarados are negated. And when it comes in, it obviously is weak to water, grass, and ice now. But grass is weak to flying. So it still has the ability to fight that off. Water, when it's in its water form, it does resist. And ice, when it's in its water flying form, it does neutral damage. So defensively, Gyarados becomes a Pokemon of how do you hit it? If it's water flying, just chilling, and you bring an electric Pokemon in, is it going to switch to ground and completely negate my damage? Hence, I've wasted a turn. What's going to happen? And even offensively, Gyarados gets a few new tricks up its sleeve. So water flying, it's effective to fighting, ground, rock, bug, fire, and grass. But if we add on ground, it is now able to hurt poison, steel, and electric. Now, one of the great things for this defensive typing is that it gets access to Earthquake. So the strongest ground move in the game, Gyarados will get access to and have it as a stab. That's going to do a lot of damage. Now, on top of that, it still does get access to Power Whip, which might not get stab, but it will help fight off the water Pokemon that appear when it switches to a ground form. Overall, Gyarados will be a very well-rounded Pokemon, and it will have people scratching their head on how do I attack it? When do I attack it? It's going to be a great Pokemon, at least in the early stages of competitive, to have in your arsenal. Now, the next Pokemon we're going to talk about is Rotom Ice. If we were to Terastallize it into just an electric type Pokemon, its only weakness would be to ground, which again is negated by Levitate, and that's it. It'll be able to resist flying, steel, and electric, and then it takes normal damage from everything else. So the fact that we can switch it into a pure electric form and negate its only weakness with Levitate kind of makes Rotom Ice one of the Pokemon that kind of benefits most from what Terastallization brings. Now, this theory also applies to pretty much all the Rotom forms, but the main reason why I'm talking about Rotom Ice is the fact that defensively, Ice Pokemon aren't the best, but offensively, they're kind of a powerhouse. So if we have a look into what electric and ice can bring to the table, they are able to effectively take out flying, ground, water, grass, and dragon, and then do neutral damage to everything else. So what's going to happen is we're going to Terastallize it into electric, which means its electric stab move goes from 1.5 times to 2 times, meaning electrically we are doing a crap ton more damage to both flying and water, and then kind of everything else that doesn't resist it, like ground. That's it. It's just going to nuke things with its electric moves. Also, it is then able to cover itself with its ice moves and do pretty much great damage to all the things it normally wants to do great damage to, but is kind of not brought to the table because, hey, I'm ice and I'm weak to everything in the world. So Terastallization isn't going to be just great for Rotom Ice. It's going to be great for ice Pokemon in general. Being able to swap their defenses into something a bit more prevalent allows it to kind of do more damage than what originally it could do. So the last Pokemon we're going to discuss is my buddy Snorlax. So Snorlax is a pure normal type, which means it's weak to fighting and takes 0 damage from ghosts and then takes normal damage from everything else. And that's kind of it defensively. Now, defensively swapping this Pokemon to Ghost kind of makes it weak to the thing that it's not taking any damage from, and then it also makes it weak to Dark. However, switching it to Ghost is great for its offensive typing abilities, and this is why. So when it's in its normal form and it has Terra Blast is actually going to have stab damage because Terra Blast is normal. So whilst it is in its normal form, it will get stab damage from Terra Blast, which means Terra Blast is kind of getting used effectively in both forms. And then when it swaps to its Ghost form, Terra Blast will now become Ghost in itself. And whilst it only is able to do half damage to Dark and no damage to normal, it will actually then be super effective against Ghost and Psychic. So it does have some of the benefits. But the real kind of synergy I wanted to look into when it comes to becoming a Ghost type is the fact that Snorlax has access to the move Curse. So if you're unaware of how Curse works, effectively, if a Pokemon who isn't a Ghost type uses it, their attack and defense is raised, but their speed is lowered. So this is normally used on Snorlax in Trick Room teams because it can use it to kind of get slower and more buff. But what happens when it's used by a Ghost Pokemon is that Pokemon uses half of its health to then put kind of like a nightmare on the opposing Pokemon, and then that Pokemon essentially loses a quarter of their HP at the end of every turn unless they're switched out. Now, when it comes to health, Snorlax has a lot. He's a big beefy boy, he's very healthy. So if you Terastallize and use Curse and go down to half damage, he's still going to have more HP than a lot of Pokemon on the field in general, but also he has access to Gluttony. So if he's holding a berry, once it gets down to the half HP, he will use a berry, which will then effectively bring him back up to like 75% HP, depending on what berry you use. And then you've kind of used the benefits of Curse and negated a lot of the weaknesses of Curse. So this is one of those attack move synergies that is only possible through Terastallization. Now, there's going to be a lot of moves that kind of work like this. Like, it might be super weak in one aspect, but then if that Pokemon who has access to it is able to Terastallize to another type, might get more benefit out of it, or it might be able to do a lot more than what it originally can do. Terastallization in itself is an amazing gimmick, and I'm really looking forward to people being able to dive into it and kind of figure out all the cool ways to use it. Now, obviously, a downside of Terastallization, especially when it comes to competitive, is effectively every Pokemon can become anything, so you kind of got to prepare for any situation to happen. But as the competitive scene moves along, there will be meta types for Pokemon. Like, people will realize, okay, Tyranitar, for example, is really only going to Terastallize into maybe 3 types. So then you only prepare for those 3 types. So eventually you will whittle down the list. Now, also, this does allow for people who have unique strategies to kind of thrive in a one-turn setting. It also lets them kind of thrive in tournaments. So if you're preparing for the meta, and then someone comes along with like a fire Tyranitar, for example, and that for some reason kind of blows up whatever the meta is, that person is going to be rewarded for having that smart play. They've identified something in the meta, they've identified a Pokemon that can kind of exploit it, and they've gone ahead and done it. They've also done it in a way that's kind of opposite to what everyone else might be doing for that particular Pokemon, which in turn will make people think, oh no, now we have to stop this at the next tournament. And then it just keeps growing and evolving. And I feel like this has more potential for kind of constant development of meta than some of the previous gimmicks did. And that is why I'm super excited for Terastallization. Now, I've only covered a handful of the possible Terra type combinations that are in existence. I'm sure there's a lot of things that other people have come across. There's things I'm even thinking about at the moment, but I just don't have any concrete evidence because I don't have the game. So if there is anything you personally have thought of and thought, hey, this could be really cool if Terra typing was this or A or whatever, please let me know in the comments below. I really would love to hear all the different tactics that people are coming up with, because I think this is super interesting. And obviously people have Pokemon that they like more than other Pokemon. Everyone's kind of subjective when it comes to Pokemon designs. So you might think of things that I haven't even thought of because I just don't think about that Pokemon as much. On top of that, if you are enjoying my videos, please let me know by leaving a like down below. And don't forget to subscribe so that you get notifications when more content like this comes out. I'm coming towards the end of my exams, which is actually at a kind of peak moment because it's like just before the game releases. So when Pokemon Scarlet and Violet does release, expect the content to kind of implode even more. There'll be more streams, more videos, everything like that. So just subscribe and you won't miss out. But like always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers!